All right, everybody. Well, welcome to another edition of Art Brunch, where we explore the wisdom of the arts, spirituality, and the great ideas. Today, we are on the third transcendental. The others are beauty, goodness, and today is truth. Now, I'd like everybody to have pen and paper handy. Just jot down some of the concepts, the ideas that I present. There are going to be questions that arise, I'm sure of it. And I also want all of us to take a deep breath and sort of feel our minds clearing up, because this material may challenge what you have always believed to be true. So you're going to get your money's worth. We're going to go deep today. Everybody has heard this phrase before: you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. However, there is also this famous statement from the same book. What is truth? Pontius Pilate. Pilate was the Roman governor of Judea who had Jesus of Nazareth put to death. Was Pilate expressing wisdom in his question or cynicism? It would take another European 850 years to state it in such a way as to shift Western culture as a whole towards cynicism about our capacity to know the truth. I'm speaking of the German Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche made two highly impactful statements. He said that God is dead, and he said the dominant human drive was the will to power. Here's the actual quote. This world is the will to power and nothing besides. And you yourselves are also this will to power and nothing besides. When Nietzsche proclaimed that God is dead, he was essentially saying that our capacity to know truth was dead. That's what the term God symbolized for many philosophers for thousands of years. God is truth. So for thousands of years, let me repeat, God symbolized truth, not only for religious people, but for philosophers as well, and scientists for that matter. I would also add that God symbolized for the church and other religions and spiritual pathways and all philosophies, not only truth, but all three of the transcendentals: truth, goodness, and beauty. But let me ask you, if God is dead, as Nietzsche indeed predicted, what does that mean for this triad? Well, naturally, our capacity to know transcendentals, including truth, is dead as well. And in its place, well, take a look at these two paintings. In its place, among other things, hedonism, greed, lust for power, meaninglessness. The artist Gross paints life as an absurd and dark joke. The world then exists only for the hyper-ambitious, ego-driven individual. It exists only for the Superman, as Nietzsche called him. The Nazis, all fascists for that matter, admired Nietzsche's philosophy of the will to power as a substitute for the pursuit of truth. They found the philosophy inspirational. Despite Nietzsche himself fearing the death of God as a path to nihilism, there's no denying that the Germans' philosophy had a major impact on a century characterized by the loss of truth, the loss of goodness, the loss of beauty. And it also seems to me, looking at the spirit of humanities departments and the essays and books coming out of such departments these days, that the will to power as the dominant human drive, well, it's mostly acknowledged by the educated class. Now, the great critic of power is NeoMarxism. And it's NeoMarxism that is alive and well in the humanities departments on campuses. Neo-Marxism accepts the will to power as the driving force in all human relations, and hence the need for a modern reapplication of Marxism to combat it and to defeat it. NeoMarxism is the driving ideology behind woke culture. Like Nietzschean individualism, NeoMarxism is also a materialist philosophy and doesn't have a place for transcendentals to inform or guide anyone. Now, despite their lofty idealism and good intentions, I think, for the most part, I believe neo-Marxism and Nietzschean egoism are spiritually hollow. They don't have the capacity to help individuals nor communities grow and flourish. But these philosophies deny truth. Now, ironically, though Nietzsche, Marx, and their derivative ideologies denied transcendentals as a whole, these and all philosophies they derive from an innate human drive to know the truth about things. When it comes to knowing truth, I'm sorry, let me go back. All human beings, even when they end up denying the possibility of truth, are driven to that conclusion by the desire to know truth. Now, when it comes to knowing truth, we usually turn to science. Despite Nietzsche's ideas, there is a real optimism, actually, in the scientific community, that science not only can give us the truth about things that we observe on this planet, but can give us the ultimate truth about the cosmos. And in doing so, discover, and I put this word in quotes, even discover God. Before the 18th century, in order to find a truth that could give us meaning, we usually turned to religion. Now, believe it or not, up until recent times, religion and science were closely related and not seen as antagonistic at all. In non-European cultures, religion and science were the same thing. Religion in most cultures has been motivated by the pursuit of ultimate transcendental truth. The truth about the highest power, the truth about our world and how to live in it, the truth about us, human beings. But since the Enlightenment, we have had a hard time because religion became divorced from science. In fact, nowadays, the two are seen as antagonistic, at least from the mainstream scientific point of view. Now, it's true, as we all know, fundamentalist religion still tries to prove its worldview using the language of science. But science simply ridicules such efforts. Friends, I see things changing in the 21st century in a way that gives me reason for hope that this is no longer the case. Science's pursuit of truth is now crossing over into spiritual quests for transcendent truth. There are three modern views or modes of truth. Go ahead and take a moment to look at these three and read their definitions. I'll explain each. One is pragmatic. Truth is what serves our purposes. This view owes a great amount to Friedrich Nietzsche's thought, but as well as to American philosophers William James and John Dewey. Have you heard of them? William James and John Dewey? This concept of truth held a great amount of attraction for me for many, many years. Think about it. If there is no God, and we are primarily motivated by the will to power, then naturally, our ideas of what are true are really about what serves our purposes, what we find useful, what works to help us explain things. Newtonian physics was true because it was a useful way of explaining our experience and empirical data in the 18th and 19th centuries. But when Einstein came along, He asked questions about the universe and observed our universe in such a way that Newtonian physics was no longer an adequate explanation. It no longer was useful. It was no longer true. So Einstein's theory of relativity became true, but only because it was more useful for explaining our observations and other scientific data. So for a pragmatist, scientific theories are only true as long as they serve human needs and purposes. As long as scientific discoveries are useful to human wants, needs, and desires, then science is a source of truth. Now, as you can assume, this view of truth is pretty controversial. Not everybody accepts it. That's why we have the other two views. Truth as coherence. It states that if something coheres with a set of beliefs or propositions that we already hold to be true, then it is true. It became the dominant view of truth for hundreds of years. Religion and philosophy during the Middle Ages were friendly with this view because much of religion at the time and philosophy were based on rational thought. If science could validate or at least be in harmony with logic, the imaginative theories that philosophers and theologians conjured up, and with sacred stories, then it was a benefit and thus true. So for most of Western history, philosophy and religion were in complete support of the scientific pursuit of truth, if it operated by the coherence mode. Conflict arose when the discoveries of Galileo and Copernicus' new view of the cosmos came along. Prior to these two figures, Western science posited an Earth-centric view of the cosmos. Earth-centric. That put human beings as the most developed species on Earth as the center of philosophical inquiry. Maybe you have heard of the philosopher of antiquity, Protagoras' famous statement, "Man is the measure of all things." Man is the measure of all things. In religion, that phrase wasn't interpreted as supporting pure relativism. It meant that God's purposes involve almost exclusively the salvation of human beings. All other creatures, along with flora, the geology, etc., were simply there for the use of humans in bringing them to salvation. I should say us. I should include myself amongst humans. And finally, we have truth as correspondence. Something is true only if it corresponds to known facts. This view of truth is closest to what modern science claims as its objectives. Science shouldn't be concerned about whether their discoveries serve human interests, and science should refrain from using imagination and speculation. Because religion and philosophy deal with more abstract concepts, the correspondence mode of truth isn't a natural fit. Truth as correspondence is dispassionate, whereas philosophy and religion involve the passions because they are about helping humans flourish. Transcendent truth indeed is about reality on Earth, in the cosmos and beyond, but transcendent truth is also about the passions, the truth of the spirit and the heart. And if we are honest, I think this is the truth we are most interested in. We want truth that matters to our flourishing. So enter my latest virtual mentor to help us out. Sister Ilia Delia. I don't know if you've heard of her, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Sister Ilia Delia. She is a Franciscan sister of Washington, D.C., and American theologian specializing in the area of science and religion, with interests in evolution, physics, and neuroscience, and the import of these for theology. She holds the Josephine C. Connolly Endowed Chair in Theology at Villanova University. She's the author of 20 books, several of which have won some prestigious awards. From Ilia, I learned about the relationship between scientific paradigms and theologies and philosophies that derived from those scientific paradigms. Ilia's big shtick, her passionate message, is that our current views of transcendental truth are derived from an antiquated scientific paradigm. She goes so far as to accuse her own faith tradition, Catholicism, of deriving much of its view of truth from the scientific knowledge of the Middle Ages. That's pre-Copernicus. For example, much theology and philosophy still shows complete ignorance of evolution and assumes Ptolemy's view of the cosmos, which put the earth at the center, not the sun. Such obsolete science supports the idea that human beings indeed are the center of the universe and that we did not evolve, but arrived on earth just as we are. She believes the church doctrine of original sin is incompatible with evolution, because original sin teaches that all creation, including us, at some point in history, began to devolve when a particular fruit was consumed in a garden long, long ago. And so we cannot participate in our own spiritual salvation and evolution, but need outside intervention from a never-changing, immutable, impassible being who hovers over earth to rescue us from this de-evolution process. I don't know. Do any of you have similar difficulty with such a view? Ilia believes our spiritual ideas, including transcendent truth, should conform to the latest scientific truth, like the Big Bang expansion, but also conform to evolution and post-Einsteinian physics. I'm not sure that's an actual word, post-Einsteinian, but you get my drift. Here's a significant question she asks. Could new mythical, spiritual, religious stories and paths arise again within our traditional religions that support the new science and also lead to human flourishing? I'll repeat that. Could new mythical, spiritual, religious stories and paths arise within our traditional religions that support the new science, but also lead to human flourishing? Such a project would require another reformation, of course, but she thinks we are long overdue for one. Unfortunately, Delia points out that many of our philosophies and theologies, our spiritual stories, are based mainly on this model: Earth dead center, and above us, a dome of stars. Also, the modern religious view of humanity is still based on a modified view of Aristotle's atomic theory of matter. Aristotle believed that all matter could be reduced to four substances: earth, air, fire, and water. These could be combined in infinite ways to form everything, but the matter they formed was a solid, fixed substance which did not change. Now, this was later modified, but only 2,000 years after his death, with the newer understanding of the atom. According to Ilia, transcendental truth cannot be derived from old science, nor the philosophies, nor the religious stories in harmony with such outdated science, especially that life devolved from Adam and Eve's eating of fruit, or that the basic substance of life is fixed, unchangeable, and that therefore humans do not participate in their own growth, sanctification, salvation, and evolution. This is what philosophy and religion should begin to base their ideas of truth on. The Big Bang expansion, for starters. but also on the discoveries of these three scientists. These gentlemen shared the Nobel Prize for Science just last year, 2022. Alan Aspect, John Clauser, and Anton Zeilinger. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing their names correctly, but you can see them there. They received the award for their work in, listen to this closely, quantum entanglement. You may want to write that down. Quantum entanglement. It is a quantum relationship between two particles that can exist over long distances. Here's a simple definition I got off of a scientific website. Quantum entanglement is a bizarre, counterintuitive phenomenon that explains how two subatomic particles can be intimately linked to each other, even if separated by billions of light years of space. Despite their vast separation, a change induced in one will affect the other. We have a universe of quantum entanglement. Everything, to various degrees, affects everything else. Now, the implications of such entanglement in Ilia Delia's thinking are that the appearance of separateness amongst matter, amongst human beings, amongst humans and animals in our environment, that appearance of separateness is an illusion. My thoughts and my actions do indeed have some level of impact on you, the environment, and vice versa. When we look at human evolution, we clearly see that we developed to seek truth, in its most mundane aspects to its grandest aspects, transcendent truth. Such seeking is in our DNA. We can't flourish if we are not seeking truth. Such truth is not something we only discover by looking in the past. Truth is discovered in every waking moment. And listen carefully to this. According to Delia's understanding of modern science, truth is something we are moving toward. Truth itself is evolving. That may be a difficult concept to grasp, so let me give you a moment before moving to the next slide. Here's another way to look at this idea of an evolving truth. Do any of you remember this diagram? It was a part of a presentation I gave, I don't know, a year or so ago. It's a model of spiral dynamics that philosopher Ken Wilber uses to describe human and cultural development. It's also a good model for seeing the development, the trajectory of truth. Let's look at it from the bottom. The beige stage of development. Not only does it apply to an individual human being, but it applies to the human species as a whole. It's about the instinctive self. It's about doing what you have to do to stay alive. The main quest, if you're at the beige stage, is just food, water, warmth, shelter. We'll scavenge for whatever we need. But then we moved up to the next stage, the purple stage, the magic animistic self. Tribes begin to form. Our main objective is no longer the mere ways to survive, but it's keeping the spirits happy, keeping the tribe safe and warm. The main goal in life is a safe mode of living. And to do that, we will petition the gods or powers with a ritual. The next stage is the red stage, characterized by an impulsive self. This is when great but often violent leaders emerge. The main quest is heroic status, power, glory. And the way to achieve it is to align oneself with power. Then we move to the blue stage of development, the role of the self. Life has meaning at this stage, direction, it has purpose with predetermined outcomes. The quest at this stage is for just ultimate peace. And the way to achieve ultimate peace is to follow the given rules. It is the age of following dogma. Well, then we elevated ourselves to the orange stage, the achiever self. Capitalistic democracies formed at this stage. Act in your own self-interest was the motto of the orange stage. Play the game to win. One can see Nietzsche's ideas at this stage. The quest is for material pleasure, and we acquire it by learning to excel, by setting goals, by achieving, by challenging ourselves, to master ourselves. And then the green stage, which Ken Wilber believes society is moving into rapidly. It's the stage of the sensitive self. Sensitive as in we become sensitive not only to our own needs, but to the needs of other people and even the need to the environment, hence green. Social democracies form at this stage. We seek peace within the inner self and explore our environment and create caring communities. Our main quest is for strong relationships with others and a strong relationship with our environment. We acquire this by a diversity of views, accepting all people, all lifestyles, all identities. We emphasize the group over the individual. Well, there are two more stages that you could see, and as a culture, as a globe even, we haven't moved into them. But that is the trajectory we are on. We eventually, according to Ken Wilber and those who believe in this, including Ilia, Delia, will move into these stages. So truth is evolving as well, based on what stage we're at. At the yellow, this is the stage of the integral self, where we no longer reject all of these other stages, but we're able to integrate them peacefully and harmoniously into our life. We want to live life fully, but responsibly. We want to see what we can become. We begin to meditate, practice contemplation, spiritual disciplines. We begin to accept all people for who they are and reach full self-actualization and overcome our existential angst. And then finally, there is the turquoise stage. Those are for the saints. Honestly, you could read them for yourself right there, but the goal is just peace, inner peace, global peace. We experience wholeness of existence through our spiritual disciplines. But as you can see from this model, that truth itself means something different, is something different at each stage. And as we move up the spiral, truth itself is evolving. Here are the conclusions that Ilia Delia has reached so far, and I'll give it to you in this quote. If revelation has taken on new meaning in our own time, it is because modern science has changed everything we know about ourselves and our world. The two fundamental changes in our understanding of nature that significantly differ from the past are evolution and quantum physics. Evolution has pushed the static God off the heavenly throne, and quantum physics has entangled mind with matter. They constitute what Thomas Kuhn called a paradigm shift in our understanding of nature and are sufficiently radical to enact fundamental changes in theological doctrine. In other words, It's time for a reformation in religion. Now, for those of you uncomfortable with the concept of God, I'm sure Delia would agree that the traditional understanding of God is indeed dying and should die. For Delia, God is the God of science. Therefore, God is not so much a being, but God is a becoming. And as evolving creatures, becoming something new ourselves. And becoming new ourselves, we participate in God's becoming. God is not hovering over us. God is intimately involved in matter, including ourselves. So our evolution is God's evolution. It's truth's evolution. Let that sink in a moment. This becoming is the energy that first emanated the three transcendentals, and the energy which binds them together. As beauty, goodness, and truth continue to evolve, so God, however you define that term, so God continues to evolve. Now, for our atheists and agnostics listening in, if you prefer a different word to God, then fill in this sentence. God is, how about love? This is a wholly appropriate word, since what binds all things from the greatest galaxies to the smallest quantum particles is the force of attraction. Attraction, along with the vulnerability to be affected by another. For me, that's a pretty adequate definition for love, at least a higher love. Now, I've given you possibly more than your brain can bear in one, I think, 35-minute presentation. I apologize if that is the case. That's why I wanted you to have pen and paper handy. Now, I actually cut out so much material that I will have one final presentation on the Transcendentals. It will mainly summarize what we've already covered, as well as address your questions and some of the challenges to the material, which you now can offer during our Q&A. So I invite you, I know there's a lot of food for thought, but I invite you, even if it's just thinking out loud, to offer your thoughts or your questions. The floor is open. Please don't forget to unmute yourselves.